everyone. Welcome to the Princeton Review live stream for AP tests. We run these live streams every day at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, and today we are dedicated to AP US History. So, if you're preparing for the AP US History test, allow me to give you a lot of good information that you're going to need to know for test day. And first of all, I'll introduce myself. My name is Gina Donegan. I'm a teacher and master tutor for the Princeton Review. I've been doing this for over 20 years, and I know a lot about all standardized tests, but in particular, some of the AP exams, such as AP US History and some of the English tests. I was here on Tuesday to give you some tips about the AP English language test. So some of you may have joined me on Tuesday. Welcome back. And we also have a couple of moderators with us today. We have Brian and Shadna. Brian and Shadna are going to keep an eye on the chat field. So if you have any questions for me, feel free to type those into the chat, and I'd be happy to answer those as we go along. And if you have a really in-depth question, you could even leave it for the end, and I'd be happy to take questions at the end. The more interactive we can make this, the better. And we certainly have time to answer questions. So, what are we going to cover today? Well, first of all, we're going to cover the basics of what you need to know about taking the AP US History exam in May of 2020. In case you haven't been following, this year's test is going to be very different from prior tests, and that's because most schools are closed right now due to coronavirus. So, we're going to talk about all the things you need to know about this year's test. We're also going to talk about what you need to do to be prepared, because preparing for this year's test may be a little different from preparing for other AP exams that you've perhaps taken in the past. And then finally, we're also going to talk about how the Princeton Review can help you with your future preparation. So, again, welcome to those of you who just came in. Feel free to ask any questions you might have by typing into the chat field. Otherwise, we will get started. So let's start with the most important things. When are you going to take this test and how is it going to work? Well, first of all, we're talking about AP US History. Remember, other tests may have other test dates, but everyone who is taking the AP US History test is taking it on Friday, May 15th at exactly 2 p.m. Eastern Time. So if you're on the East Coast, that's your time. But if you're in a different time zone, you'll need to make that conversion. So, for example, West Coast time, that's 11 a.m. If you're in Hawaii, it's going to be very early in the morning. If in doubt, check the College Board website to find out exactly what time you're taking the test. And it's important because you need to be logged on up to 30 minutes in advance to make sure you're ready to go at exactly 2 p.m. So you have exactly 5 weeks from today to prepare. It's a lot of time, but it's going to go by quickly. So it's not too soon to start thinking about your preparation. Now, because this is the year of coronavirus, we're not taking a full length AP US History exam. Normally, there would be a slew of multiple choice questions, there would be multiple essays. This test would go on for hours, right? But this year, in some ways, you're lucky because all you're being asked to do is write one essay in 45 minutes. That's it. That's the entire exam. So you really only have to prepare for one task. But of course, the bad news is your entire score is based on that one task. So you have to make sure you're as good as you can be on that one essay. And we're calling this a modified document based question. There's always a document based question on the AP US History. I'll call it A push for short. But this year's is modified because instead of working with 7 source documents, which is what you're usually asked to do, this year you only have to work with 5 source documents. And the entire essay is a little bit shorter. actually take the test? You're obviously taking it on some sort of computerized device, right? You're not taking it on paper like you normally would. I would highly recommend that you take this on a laptop or desktop computer. And the reason I recommend that is because then you will have access to a standard keyboard and you'll be able to type your essay. It's always going to be faster for most people to type rather than handwriting an essay. Now, if you happen to be an exception, if you're extremely slow typer, then you may be an exception to this. But for most people, I'm going to say the laptop or the desktop is the best way to go. Now, let's say you don't have access to a laptop or a desktop computer. You also have the option of taking it on a tablet or a smartphone, but in that case, you're going to be doing it in a different manner. So I'll tell you more later about how that will work. But the key is plan ahead, right? Have a device that's reliable, that has a good internet connection, and be comfortable with that device if that's what you're going to use on test day. Now, what actual material will you be tested on? What do you have to know for this year's A push? Well, you don't have to know as much as you normally would. The College Board has actually decided not to test you on certain material. And I think that's for a couple of reasons. One is that the document based question tends to be based on more on certain time periods rather than others, but also because the College Board understands that a lot of you have been out of school now for a few weeks. You may not have done any AP US history in 3 or 4 weeks. So that means you likely have not learned about things like the Vietnam War, right? Those are typically things that are learned at the end of the year. So the College Board has decided they're only going to test you on material from the years 1754, so that's around the French and Indian War, to 1945, which is the end of World War II. So you actually don't have to know anything past 1945. If your teacher has actually been covering that material, okay, great. You'll still need to study that for school, but you won't need to prep that material for the AP US history test. Um, Now, let's say you haven't even gotten close to 1945. Maybe you were covering the Spanish American War when all of a sudden your school shut down and you haven't done any online classes since then. Well, then you're one of those people who's going to have to spend some time prepping that material from, say, 1900 to 1945 on your own, because any of that could potentially be on your test. And hopefully, your school is giving you some good support for how to do that. But if they're not, or if you feel a little lost with some of that later material, we've got your back. Okay. I'm going to give you some specific advice on how to prepare your notes, and I'm going to give you some specific resources that you can use in case you do need to research some of that newer history that your teacher didn't cover. And of course, there's a lot of material out there on the internet, but the problem with the internet is you're just going to get deluged with all sorts of things that may or may not be relevant to this test. So you really need some guidance about what to study. What do you need to study and what don't you need to study? That's what we do at the Princeton Review. Shadna says, or someone in the comment field says, even though we won't be tested on it, would it be useful for you to learn these periods, 1 and 2 and 8 and 9? That's a great question. Yeah, it's not useless. Okay. So, for example, if they happen to give you a document based question on the French and Indian War, it would be kind of nice to know what happened before the French and Indian War, right? That might be helpful for context. Or by the same token, if they ask you about um, World War II, which would be kind of late in the periods, I doubt they're going to ask you about it, but let's say they do. It might be nice to know what happened after World War II. So it's not like those other units are completely useless, and it's not like you can't discuss historical events from outside of this time period. You can, if you know of something that happened in 1950 that you think might be somehow relevant, you could mention it. But it just means you wouldn't be required to know that material. So it's useful, but not required. Let's put it that way. Of course, the more you know, the better. But personally, I think you should focus on the units that are tested and don't go too far outside of that. Unless your teacher has already, taught you about things outside of these units. Now, let's talk about one of the interesting and cool parts of this year's A Push. Open book, open notes. Yes, you are allowed to have notes in front of you while you're writing your essay. Normally that would not be true, right? Normally you'd just be sitting there and all you would be able to use is what's in your own mind. But this year you are allowed as many notes as you want. They can be handwritten notes, they can be computer notes that you have in a document on your computer. Um, Now, it's even possible that you can Google things. However, I'm going to strongly suggest you not do that. Okay. Googling things while you're doing the essay eats up way too much time. That should be an absolute last resort and it should be really fast. But frankly, I think if you're doing any Googling, it just means that your notes weren't properly prepared. I'd rather see you go in with some good notes, handwritten or typed, rather than just randomly Googling things during the test. By the way, the College Board has said that they're not primarily grading you on facts and figures, right? So things like dates, names, little picky details that you think you would have to Google or, go worst case, go to Wikipedia. That's not good, right? Not always reliable. Um, but if you do find those random facts on the internet, the College Board has actually said they're not going to give you any additional credit for those random facts. They're more interested in seeing how you can reason, how you can put things in context, how you can look at causes and effects, comparisons of events. So, if you think you have to Google, when the Civil War ended, actually, you don't. You can just say the Civil War ended. That's good enough for the College Board. They're not going to give you any additional points for listing off a random date. So I'd rather see you have a few basic things in your notes and use your notes only. Do not rely on Google searches. One more little housekeeping issue. In case you're in any doubt as to whether you are registered for the AP US History test, there's a place you can go to at collegeboard.org. It's called My AP. And if you go to myap.collegeboard.org and log in, you can find out if you are actually registered for the exam. Chances are you are, but it wouldn't hurt to check that, especially since this year is a little unusual. Shadna says, does that mean we will not need to know any specific years? Um, Technically, yes. Yeah, technically that's true. Although I always think that adding some details, makes your ideas more persuasive and more specific, right? So if you do happen to remember that Abraham Lincoln was elected in 1860, great. It's always good to include a fact if it's true, right? But if you're in any doubt, it's probably better to leave out that date, right? So there are probably only a handful of dates that you would want to include in your essay. It's kind of an optional thing. What the graders really care about is just whether your facts are, generally correct and whether you're able to use evidence to prove your point. That's what matters the most. They're not specifically grading you on things like specific dates. Like I say, if it's possible to find it on Google, it's you're not going to actually get any extra points for that. So only include it if you know it and it's accurate and it's relevant to what you're talking about. But certainly details are good. Okay, so again, for those of you who maybe just joined us, my name is Gina Donegan, and we're talking about the AP US History test, specific information that you need to know for the May 2020 exam, which, as you probably know, is computer based and only consists of a modified document based question, DBQ. So we're talking about things you need to know about notes, content. If you have any questions, feel free to just type those into the YouTube chat. Shadna says, or sorry, commenter says, should we not rely on our textbook? That's a good question. See, the problem with your textbook is it's probably huge. Now, some people have a physical textbook, right, that might be this thick. Other of you might be relying on more of a digital textbook, but it's crammed full of information, right? I don't think it's practical to be hunting through that textbook for things while you're in the middle of a 45-minute essay. That just does not sound like a good use of time. So by all means, have your textbook nearby, but I really want you to have your own notes in order because your notes are going to be much more concise than whatever's in that textbook. And I just think it's a lot more handy and a better use of time to be able to refer to good notes than to have to hunt through your textbook, looking things up in the index. That just sounds like it's going to take forever. It's probably better than Googling things, but it's still time consuming. So you need to go in with notes. You can't just sort of come in with your textbook and expect you're going to be golden. You really do need some notes, in my opinion. And yes, we are going to take a look at specific ways to organize your notes. That's going to be kind of the big money part of this session is I'm going to show you some suggestions on how to organize your notes. There are a number of ways you can do it, but I'm going to show you a couple of suggestions. Okay, so again, all subjects, all AP tests, chances are you might be taking more than one AP test this year. They're all 45 minutes long. And they all typically involve one or two key questions. In this case, one essay prompt. Depends on the nature of the test you're taking. But if it's sort of a humanities style test like English or history, then it's going to be an essay question. If it's math or science, it might be a little different. But all of the tests are greatly abbreviated. Remember, you are allowed to sign into the system to take the test up to 30 minutes in advance. And I would suggest you sign in as soon as possible, 30 minutes in advance, because if you have any technical problems, you want to work those out before the test begins. Because as soon as 2 p.m. Eastern time rolls around, you will be expected to be writing your essay. Now, if things get really bad and, I don't know, your computer breaks in the middle of the test or something extreme like that, there will be a makeup test. So it's not like this is a one shot deal, but still, who wants to bother with a makeup? It's better to be logged in 30 minutes in advance, have everything ready to go, knock out your essay, and be done. By the way, at the end of the essay, you have about 5 minutes to upload your essay to the College Board. If you are somebody who normally receives testing accommodations, and typically testing accommodations are given to people who have a long-standing documented learning difference, and typically accommodations come down to extended time. So if that applies to you, you probably know that you are eligible for it. Just make sure that the College Board is aware that you are eligible for those accommodations. You have 5 weeks between now and May 15th. So now would be a good time to go to myap at collegeboard.org and make sure that you are going to get accommodations on test day. If for some reason that didn't get attached to your account, you want to make sure you can remedy that before May 15th. Um, and let's see, Fadi says, how long should the essay be? We're going to get into context or into structure, but the basic answer to that, Fadi, is your essay needs to be as long as it can be. Okay, so you need to write as much as you can in 45 minutes. For most people, that's going to mean 4 or 5 paragraphs. And we are going to get into things like how not to get caught plagiarizing and all of that. Yeah, we are going to cover all of that. But the basic answer is your essay needs to be a lot longer than a few lines. Your essay needs to be a few paragraphs. So the longer, the better. And yeah, Bulldozer, that's a good comment. If you have cracking the AP US history test, that's really the best resource you can use right now in writing. But we also have some other resources at princetonreview.com that I'm going to talk about too, such as actual AP tutoring if you need it. And have a great day says, will we be able to simulate the test? Yes, have a great day. The College Board has just come out and announced that they are going to be releasing some practice tests. Now, I haven't actually seen those practice tests yet, but keep an eye on the College Board website. And we are going to be running some more A-Push live streams next week and the week after. So if I find out about access to those tests, I'll let you know as soon as I find out about them. But yes, there should be a way to actually practice using the tester before test day. And have a great day also asks, Will we receive future questions or resources? I think I just answered that. Yeah, we will be getting some access to practice prompts and access to the tester. But as far as I know, that hasn't been released yet. If Shadna or Brian have any information about that, feel free to jump in. Let's see. Connor says, yeah, there is an alternative way to submit your essay, Connor. So we'll definitely talk about that. I'm strongly recommending that you use a laptop or desktop computer, which means you will not be taking a picture of anything. You will be typing your essay into a field that will, you will then upload to the College Board. But there is an alternative way to do it for people who don't have a laptop or desktop. So we will definitely talk about that. Okay, so again, the essay prompt that you will be expected to write on for this year's AP US History is a document based question prompt, also known as DBQ. But it's modified because normally the DBQ is fairly long, it has 7 sources. This year, it will only have 5 sources. So, this is good news. We have less to read. And of course, we have less time as well. So we want to try to make the reading fairly quick so that we can get down to the writing. You will not be dealing with any multiple choice questions on this test, and you will not be dealing with any other types of essays. It's just the DBQ. Okay, so let's get a little more specific about technology because Connor asked me a question that I think is related to, how to actually take this test. Technically, you can take the AP test on any device that has access to the internet. So, computers, laptop or desktop, tablets, even a smartphone. So, the College Board does want to make it flexible for students to so that virtually everyone will have the opportunity to take the AP. By the way, if you don't have any devices, now, if you don't have any devices, you probably wouldn't be with me today. But if you don't think you're going to have any devices available to you on test day, you can even go to collegeboard.org and they have a way that you can contact them for that case. Let's say you don't think you're going to have any access to a computer on May 15th. You can reach out to the College Board, and apparently there are alternatives they will offer you. I don't know what the alternatives are. I haven't actually gone and filled out the form, but they do want to try to make the AP accessible to everyone. So don't let lack of access to technology prevent you from taking this test. There's a way to take it no matter what. But I do want you to think about the method that would be most effective for you. Okay, because even though theoretically you can do this thing on your smartphone, is that really the best way for you to do it? Probably not. The best way for you to do it in most cases is going to be to use a laptop or desktop computer with a real keyboard. And the reason why is typing is almost always faster and definitely neater than handwriting an essay, right? Because if you choose to use a tablet or a smartphone, then you're not going to use that little keyboard on your tablet, right? That thing is going to take forever. What you'll actually be doing is hand writing the essay on paper, and then you'll be taking a picture of it with your tablet or smartphone and uploading it to the College Board that way. Again, it's possible. If that's your only option, you can do it. But the problem is, handwriting takes a bit of time. You're going to wear your hand out. You're going to make some mistakes and you're going to have crossouts. It's possible that the grader might have a difficult time reading your handwriting. So for this year, I don't think it's the ideal way to do the AP. The ideal way is to type your essay. That way you can backspace, delete, cut, and paste. Now, you may not have access to sophisticated tools like spell check and grammar check, right? So it's not going to be a nice word program, but it's still going to be faster and easier than handwriting for most people. So, in my opinion, the only people who should be taking the AP on a tablet or a smartphone are people who do not have access to a laptop or a desktop, or people who have some kind of severe difficulty with typing. If you're a really bad typer, then for you, handwriting it might be better. But I'm guessing most of you use computers on a regular basis, so you're probably pretty good at typing. You don't have to be a super fast typer, right? You just need to be a sort of decent typer, and it's going to be faster than handwriting. So the key is decide for yourself what device you're going to use. and be prepared. Don't sort of decide an hour before the test. Make sure you're comfortable with the device you're using. Okay, so again, for those of you who just came in, you're welcome to ask any questions that you might have. You can just type those into the YouTube chat, and either Shadna or Brian will be moderating the chat. So thank you all for joining me. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about open book, open notes. So, according to the College Board, you are allowed to have virtually any kinds of books or notes at your disposal while you're taking the test. So, somebody asked earlier about textbooks. Sure, you could have your textbook sitting there on the couch next to you or on the table next to you while you're taking the test. Um, that shouldn't be your only resource, though, because again, that textbook is big. It takes a long time to find things. The textbook shouldn't be the only thing in front of you, but you can certainly have it there as some security in case you need it. You can have handwritten notes in a notebook. You can have uh, documents on your computer. Say a Word document with a bunch of notes in it. It's even possible to Google things. Let's be realistic. They can't stop you from Googling things. It's not against the rules, but it's not as handy as you might think. Okay, googling things actually is going to detract from your ability to write that essay in 45 minutes. So in my opinion, no googling. Use your notes, use your textbook. If you Google, only do it once. Okay, do not be Googling multiple times during the exam. That's just not wise at all. And of course, not everything you find on the internet is reliable either. So we have to keep that in mind. That's why notes, your own notes, are probably better. Here's what you're not allowed to do: you are not allowed to collaborate with anyone else while you're taking this test. You can't talk to friends, you can't talk to parents, you can't talk to your history teacher. Hopefully, she wouldn't do that anyway, but you're not allowed to collaborate with anyone. This has to be your own work. And you're also not allowed to do any plagiarism whatsoever from a book, from the internet. Those things are off limits. So it's great that we're allowed some notes, but let's not break the rules, because if we do get into things like collaboration with others or plagiarism, we could run the risk of really screwing things up. And you might be wondering, how would the College Board know it if I cheated, right? How would they know that? Well, first of all, they will not be monitoring you with a webcam. So it's not like somebody's literally looking over your shoulder to see what you're doing. However, there are two ways that the College Board could find out if you were breaking the rules, if you were cheating. Number one, they will be using anti plagiarism software. So they will take whatever you write and upload it into this anti plagiarism software. And that software is checking to see if what you've written comes from any published sources or any internet sources. So if you scalped something from a book or a website, that software is going to find out that you did that. Even if it's only a sentence or two sentences, it's not going to be good if you did that. So no plagiarism, please. Another thing you should be aware of is that whatever you write will be sent to your AP US history teacher. And the College Board will ask your AP US history teacher, hey, does this look like Connor's writing? Does this look like something Connor might write? And if your AP US history teacher says, no, this doesn't look like anything that Connor's ever written before, this looks like Connor's mom wrote it. Maybe Connor's mom is a historian. Who knows? I'm not picking on you, Connor, but sorry about that. But if it looks like it's not your work, you could potentially be in some big trouble. Number one, if they can prove or even attempt to prove that you cheated, then your AP score is null and void, right? You wasted your time because you're not going to get an AP score. And get this, the College Board is even going to tell colleges that you're applying to that you were caught cheating on the AP. That's serious, right? If you get blacklisted from college, this is not good. So do not cheat. Okay, no collaboration, no plagiarism, but please make full use of your notes and any resources of that kind, because that's going to help a lot. If you have any questions, let me know. You can type those into the YouTube chat. And at this point, we have talked about all of the nuts and bolts of how you're going to be taking the test. The fact that it's a computer-based test, it's only one essay, document-based, with only 5 sources. We've talked about the rules of the game. And by the way, if you're looking for some really detailed things like what time will I be taking this test in Hawaii, you can feel free to go to collegeboard.org. And there's a lot of information on there about APs and specifically the coronavirus AP this year, May 2020. Let's see. So, any other logistical questions? Okay. Connor says, is copying and pasting from our own essays that we have previously written allowed? That's a great question, Connor. That's an excellent question. You know what? That's not plagiarism. That's your work. Okay. So that's fine. Yeah. Um, because of now that's of course assuming that it hasn't been published anywhere, right? Because maybe technically if it's been published that could be plagiarism, but if it's your own work that's perfectly fine. I don't think, however, that it's likely that you're going to have material you can just scalp and use because remember, we're basing this essay on documents. You've never seen this exact grouping of documents before. So if you want to grab a few lines from an essay you wrote, that's fine. But you're not going to be able to like cut and paste a whole essay because you've never written an essay on the documents that you're going to see on May 15th. So it's a cool idea, but again, I doubt you're going to be able to use much of your prior material for this. John says, will the grading be any stricter due to the fact that it's open book or open note? Um, let's put it this way, John. We can't assume that it's going to be more lenient. Okay. We definitely can't assume that. I would assume the grading is going to be exactly what it is, what it's always been. Okay. I wouldn't say stricter. I'd just say the grading is going to be what it's always been. But I'm glad you asked that question because here's what I think is going to happen. Because all students have access to open book, open notes, and even Google, graders are not going to be impressed by your knowledge of facts, right? Because they know you're grabbing these facts from your notes. So the graders are going to be more strict about how you put the facts together. Maybe on a typical AP exam they would be impressed if you remembered something about the Know Nothing Party. Okay, but now they're going to be less impressed because the Know Nothing Party might have been in your notes. However, they're going to be more impressed if you can connect the Know Nothing Party to something else, like maybe anti-immigrant sentiment in the 1920s, right? That's going to be more impressive because that means you had to put that together in your own mind. That's not something you necessarily would have, gotten off of Google. Let's just assume the grading is as strict as it's always been, but what they really care about is your thoughts, your ideas, your ability to put things together. The facts and figures are just a kind of framework for that. Everybody has access to the same basic information, unlike on other tests. Chase asks, what would happen if we didn't plagiarize and the software detects it as plagiarism? I don't know how that would happen, Chase. I don't think that could happen. I mean, what the plagiarism software is going to detect is exact phrasings, exact sentences, right? So I don't see how and let's put it this way, if the plagiarism software does detect something like that, a human being is going to double check it, right? It's not like it's just the end of your AP score if the software screws up, right? But if you're not plagiarizing, the software shouldn't be picking up anything as plagiarism. Let's see. Somebody, Extreme Skills asks, could I use previous documents or essays? Okay, I think I answered that. Yes, you can use your own work. You just can't use somebody else's work. Um, Bulldozer asks, what if we use the textbook but then get blamed for plagiarism even if you didn't do it? Well, bulldozer, you can't directly quote the textbook. That's the thing. If you're drawing exact quotes from the textbook, you're in trouble. What you have to do is, if you're going to use the textbook, you have to put it in your own words. As long as you put it in your own words, you should be fine. Do not copy phrases or sentences from the textbook. Let's see. So somebody asks, technically, can we still take the 5 minutes of submitting to write the essay? I wouldn't count on that, car. My understanding is it's only 45 minutes for writing. And then at that point, you have to spend the remaining time uploading the essay. So, for instance, the system might just automatically stop you from typing at the end of 45 minutes. I suspect that's how it's going to work. So don't figure you've got 50. I'm not positive because I haven't seen the actual system that the College Board is using, but um, let's assume that it's only 45 minutes and there's no wiggle room there. And then I think you might have asked a question about scoring too. You heard that a 5 out of 6 is a 5 and a 4 out of 6 is a 4. Yep. So OMCAR is specifically talking about the scoring range for the essays. So let's talk about that if you're not familiar with it. Traditionally, AP essays are scored on a scale of 1 to 6, 1 being the lowest score, 6 being the highest score. Technically, you could get a 0 if you did something really bad, okay? But most people are going to get somewhere from a 1 to a 6. However, AP scores, AP overall scores, go on a scale of 1 to 5. So I think what Omkar is asking is, how are the AP graders going to grade my essay? Are they going to grade it on a scale of 1 to 6 or 1 to 5? And the answer to that is we don't know for sure. However, if I had to guess, I'd say it's going to be 1 to 5, right? Because what would be the point of scoring it from 1 to 6 and then converting to 1 to 5? That wouldn't make any sense. It would make more sense for the grader to score 1 to 5. But still somewhat unknown on that. And let's see. Have a great day might have had an extended question. He have a great day asked about further questions or resources provided by the College Board, and then he had a follow-up question about using notes textbooks and or Google. So I'm not sure what your follow-up was on the notes textbooks and Google, but like I said, any notes or textbooks are allowed. They can't stop you from using Google, but I'm going to strongly suggest you don't use Google just because it's a major time waster. Okay, that's the primary reason. If you're Googling things, it means your notes aren't good. You have 5 weeks to prepare your notes. So I'm going to show you in a couple of seconds here how to prepare your notes. And Captain Kapow is asking about a specific rubric for getting a certain score. Um, Captain Kapow, I don't think we're going to have time to get into the rubric today. But we are going to get into that in probably our next live stream for A Push. So if you really want the nitty gritty on the rubric, join me for the next live stream and we'll talk about that, because the rubric is a little different from what it was last year because of this modified DBQ. However, I am going to give you some basic tips on what you need to do to get a high score. So for a detailed rubric, let's wait on that, but I am going to give you some specifics today. Alexa studies for the SAT. That's a good name. Is it possible to accidentally close out of the test? If so, will the essay save? That's a great question. My guess is if you accidentally close out of it, you should be able to get right back into it. But of course, at that point, you've wasted some time, Alexa. So if you have any major technical glitches on test day, it really may be in your best interest to cancel and go for the makeup test. There is going to be a makeup date for all of these exams. When I say major technical glitch, I mean something that costs you serious time. Okay, if you spent 5 or 10 minutes trying to resolve your technical problem, you're probably better off going for the makeup exam. And that's why there is a makeup test date for people who have issues like that. I would just say be careful, right? Be careful and don't have a bunch of applications open on your computer at once. Just try not to get yourself into that jam. Um, And Niall says, will this be in a lockdown browser? I'm not sure exactly what a lockdown browser is, Niles. And again, that sort of falls into the category of unknown. For example, somebody asked me once, will you be able to use Grammarly? I doubt it. So maybe that's what Niles means by a lockdown browser, is it may prevent you from running certain other applications in the background. But it will not prevent you from using a web browser. So you're not going to be prevented from using things like your email or Google. So in that sense, no, you're not. It's not like you're only limited to one browser window. I know that that's not true. And Niles, you are allowed to Google search, but again, if you're Googling, you're wasting time. And I'm not saying that because I don't want you to Google. I'm saying that because I want you to spend as much of your time as possible actually writing the essay. Google searches should be unnecessary if you prepared your notes properly. Believe me, if you're Googling 4 or 5 things, you're wasting big time. Your essay is not going to be as long as it should be. Todd says, what is the exam curve? Shadna, did you have a comment?
I do, if you don't mind. If you'd
Sure.
like, why don't you go on ahead and start digging into the content, and I'll grab all the questions around the curve and all of the things that you've been talking about, so that you can focus on the content with them, everyone. And then the rest of you that has questions around plagiarism, curves, chats, grades, all of that, I'll answer those for them via the chat directly.
Okay,
All
sounds
right.
good.
Thanks.
Okay, so let's get into the meat. Some of you are waiting to see how do I prepare my notes. So that's what I want to show you right now. First of all, we talked about how the document-based question, also known as DBQ, is now for this year based on 5 historical sources, not 7. One of those historical sources will be a non-text based source. So that means it'll be a chart, a graph, a cartoon. And by the way, that's always true of the DBQ anyway. So this is not something new. The sources can be primary sources or secondary sources. It'll be a mixture of the two. Now, what are you actually being asked to do? Well, you're really being asked to read all of the sources, and some of them may take a while to read. So that's where part of our timing challenge comes in. Read all of the sources and answer a specific question based on those sources. And it's important to read their question carefully so you know what they're asking for. So let's call that the prompt. Your job is to respond to the prompt with a thesis. And of course, the thesis usually comes down to either agreeing with the statement, disagreeing, or providing some sort of middle ground there. Well, sometimes it's true, sometimes it's not. Um, so, a thesis or claim. You need to describe the broader historical context relevant to that prompt question. So, you need to show that you have an understanding of what was going on in history beyond just what's given to you in the sources. You need to support your thesis or claim using at least 4 of the documents, but ideally all 5 of them, actually. If you leave out one, that's okay. If you leave out more than one, your score is going to suffer for it. So use all 5 documents or at least 4. Now, here's something that's a little new to the May 2020 exam. In addition to the historical documents, you also need to provide at least 2 pieces of information that were not given in the documents. So this means outside knowledge. And this is where your notes come in, right? Now, if you have more than 2 pieces of information from outside the documents, then even better. But you have to have a minimum of 2 in order to get yourself in the running for a high score. They also expect you to explain something about the author's point of view, purpose, audience for at least 2 of the documents. So, what this is showing is that you understand the context around that particular source. And of course, always use evidence to back up your point of view. So, there's kind of a lot there, but if we really boil it down, what do you need to do? You need to read and understand the 5 sources. You need to use all of them or almost all of them in your essay. You need to have at least 2 pieces of outside knowledge that are not in the documents, that come from your own knowledge and your notes. And you need to use all of this to support a specific thesis or claim based on the question that they ask you. So you're not making up the topic, right? You're reading a specific question and you're just taking a certain position with regard to that question. And in future live streams, we will get even more specific and take a look at some example DBQs if you haven't seen these in a while. But now let me give you some specific advice on how to organize your notes. Okay, because open book, open notes, this is great. The problem with a push though is there's a tremendous amount of information out there, right? We're talking 200 years of American history. How do you actually compile that into notes that are usable on test day? How do you come up with notes that are more concise than a textbook and easier to use than a textbook? Well, there are a couple of ways you can do that. There may be more than a couple of ways to do that, but I'm going to give you a couple of ways that I think make sense to me. And if you have any other ideas, you can certainly let me know. But one possible approach is to organize all of your notes in roughly chronological order, where you start with 1754 and you go up to 1945. I know that's a lot, but you have 5 weeks to do it. And one possibility would be index cards. These could either be physical index cards, go down to the dollar store, pick up some index cards, or they could be electronic index cards like a Quizlet app if you're a Mac user. And I'm sure if you go into a Windows computer, there's probably something kind of similar to Quizlet as well. And one, I think, good way to organize the information might be one index card per decade. For instance, let's say you're making an index card for the 1850s. A lot of important things happened in the 1850s. This was before the Civil War. And so you want to think about big picture issues because remember, the College Board is not just about nitty gritty details, they're definitely about the big picture. But it's also good to include specific events that might have happened in the 1850s because, of course, it's events that all play into the big picture. So for the 1850s, we know that America was actively involved in westward migration, acquisition of new territories, such as after the Mexican American War. The gold rush had started in the 1840s, so this was still a hot draw to places like California in the 1850s. So westward migration was going on throughout this time period. Also, the concept of manifest destiny, that America had a kind of uh, God given right to conquer the West and was sort of fated to do this, and that this would be, a great thing for the American people. But at the same time, we have continuing debates over slavery. We have things like the gag rule in Congress, big divisions, factional divisions between the North and the South, right? You have Southern Democrats versus Northern Whigs and later Republicans. Um, in 1850, you have the passage of the Compromise of 1850, which included the Fugitive Slave Act. In response to that, the North comes around with these personal liberty laws. The personal liberty laws were all passed during the 1850s. You also had the rise of the Know Nothing Party, which was not directly connected to slavery, but they were more connected to immigration coming in the early part of the 19th century. The Know Nothings were suspicious of immigrants and specifically Catholic immigrants. So all this is kind of simmering while the slavery debate is also getting hot and heavy. So major events in the 1850s, Compromise of 1850, Kansas-Nebraska Act, the end of the Free Soil Party, but the beginning of the Republican Party, the Dred Scott decision in 1857, John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry, And then, of course, at the end of this decade, you had the election of Abraham Lincoln, which then, ushers in all the events that lead up to the Civil War. There could be some other things that I left off the card. I kind of ran out of space on my card. But of course, your card could be one side, right? Or it could be two sides. Some decades had more major events than others. It's okay if your card only has a few things on it, but again, you want to think about big picture issues and then more individual events. Both of those things are important for each decade. Now, if it happens to be a really important time in history, like say the New Deal, you could create a card just for the New Deal, right? Because obviously um, that was something that extended beyond just a few years, but so many things happened that it might be worth its own card. So this would be the chronological approach. But then there's another possible approach, which is organizing your notes by topic. And this might work well with certain topics. So, for instance, let's say you want an entire card that shows you all the 19th century reformers. And with 19th century reformers, we think of things like the temperance movement. We also think of abolition, although abolition is such a big topic unto itself that you might decide to have one card just for abolition because there's so much going on there. So maybe the 19th century reformers, you leave out the abolition and you just focus on things like the temperance movement, the women's suffrage movement. Maybe you list off some specific people like Dorothea Dix, Horace Mann, Helen Hunt Jackson. She was really active in advocating for rights for Native Americans. This is by no means a complete list, but these are the kinds of things that you could put on your card. And notice I am including dates. Now, does that mean you have to rattle off a bunch of dates in your essay? No. Okay. Just the fact that I have dates written down here does not necessarily mean that you need to be putting dates in your essays. It's just a way of organizing the information. So that way, in your mind, you know that, Dorothea Dix came around way before Helen Hunt Jackson. And that way, you're not saying things that kind of mix them together or put them in the wrong time period. So the chronology is more for your benefit to be able to organize the information for yourself. And of course, the A push units are all organized around time periods. So it's kind of natural to apply times to things, even though we don't have to memorize these dates and we don't even necessarily have to put a lot of them in an essay. So those are a couple of ideas. There could be other ways of organizing your notes. I'm just giving you a couple of ideas that make sense to me. Um, and of course, if you don't have to use index cards, you could write all of these things out in a single document, type them in a single document. That's possible too. The reason I kind of lean toward index cards is because I think um, they're easy to get through quickly by just kind of pawing through them, right? Or if it's a Quizlet app, you're just kind of paging through the index cards. That way, it's not all just kind of mashed together in one document. So use what works for you. But the key is start working on your notes now because obviously there are a lot of notes that you're going to need. And your document based question is only going to be based on one specific issue or time period, but as soon as you see the documents and you see what the time period is, you can go straight for your notes and say, okay, these are the notes I'm going to need for this particular DBQ. So if you have any questions about those notes, let me know. And we're starting to run out of time here, but I also want to just give you another thing. As a matter of fact, if you have the ability to take a screenshot, you might want to just screenshot this slide. Because on this slide, I've given you an action list for the document based question. No matter what kind of question they ask you, these are the things that you want to be focused on in your essay. And I'll just quickly run through them and explain what they are. Number one, the most basic thing you need to do in every document based question is identify and explain the historical developments that are in the sources and that are relevant to the prompt. So, just get down to the nitty gritty. What was the Seneca Falls Convention? Who organized it? Why? which will involve some names, right? Which will involve some important movements and maybe some dates, but the dates are maybe less important. You can use them if you want to. You don't have to if you don't know them or they're not in your notes. Number two, you should always be trying to identify the source's point of view, purpose, historical situation, and or audience. Now, technically, you only have to do this for two of the sources. However, it wouldn't hurt to do this for as many of the sources as you can, right? If you have time and space, it's useful to show that you're keyed into these things. For example, if they give you a source that happens to be Booker T. Washington's Atlanta Compromise speech, you know, tell us who Booker T. Washington was. He was a black abolitionist. Tell us the historical situation. This was after the Civil War. Um, and tell us his purpose. Why was it a compromise? Who was he trying to compromise with? Number three, you should always be trying to find claims or arguments where relevant. So, for instance, Benjamin Franklin, join or die. What was his claim? What was his argument? He was trying to inspire the colonies to unite. Next up, analyze the context of historical events. So, instead of just talking about the Proclamation of Neutrality, tell us why George Washington issued this Proclamation of Neutrality. It had to do with problems that they were experiencing with France and Great Britain. Here are the 4 C's that the College Board really cares about: comparison, causation, continuity, and change. This means whenever you have the option of comparing things, that's good. Show cause and effect where relevant. Explain whether things continued in a certain vein or whether they changed. So that would be continuity and change. For example, the War of 1812 was, really a war between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. But then after that, we had the era of good feelings with Monroe. So there was big time change. But then things changed again when Jackson was elected, right? Because lots of people disliked Jackson. So what we see over this time is primarily change, not continuity. And finally, it's always good to develop an argument. And that's really what you're being asked to do with the DBQ, is to give a thesis or an opinion on something. Don't just ramble on about manifest destiny. Form a thesis. Say something like, manifest destiny was really about money. It wasn't about American ideals. Now that's just your opinion, but that's what you're being asked to do in the DBQ. So, hopefully, I've given you a lot to think about. There is more, right? We are going to run another one of these live stream sessions in the next week or two. So, keep an eye on our YouTube channel and feel free to join me for the next session. And we'll talk more about specific DBQ prompts, how to approach them, how to outline for them. And as usual, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. So if you have any last questions, let me know. Otherwise, we're done for today. Thank you so much for joining me, and hopefully I'll see you for episode 2 next time. Have a good day, everyone.